Former Labor Secretary and author of Saving Capitalism for the Many, Not the Few. He's also a professor of public policy at University of California, Berkeley. Also with us, CNN senior economic analyst Stephen Moore. He's chief economist at the Heritage Foundation and served as a senior economic advisor to the Trump campaign. Secretary Reich, we heard a very different timeline, obviously, from President Trump this weekend, saying they should have something by the end of the year, maybe even next year. This is something he said he was going to do on day one. Is this just the reality of the challenge settling in?
Well, it's partly the reality of the challenge, Anderson, but it goes beyond that. It's reality of mathematics, because what Republicans have discovered, and this is not a new discovery, even when they were railing against Obamacare 2 and 3, 5 years ago, they were trying to come up with a replacement. They couldn't, because if you want pre-existing conditions to be covered, you've got to have a mandate for healthy people to get health care. You've also, in terms of subsidizing, 80% of the people who are on Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act do get some federal subsidies. To pay for those subsidies, you've got to raise taxes primarily on the wealthy. And that's the way Obamacare is organized. If you repeal this piece or that piece, you simply can't afford to do it.
Stephen, is that how you see it, that it's much more difficult than Republicans had sort of led on?
Well, look, I think it is mathematics, Bob, and I think you got the mathematics all wrong. I mean, the problem with Obamacare was that it promised, Anderson, that we're going to put tens of millions more people under a government-subsidized system, and that there were going to be all sorts of services provided, and that somehow this was actually going to save the system money, and that we were going to reduce the deficit, and none of that has happened. Bob, there aren't a lot of people in this country who are saving $2,500 a year on their health insurance. In fact, most families are costing more. I mean, my own situation, my family, we're $2,000 more per for our family per year, and those are costs people simply can't afford. The key statistic, I think, Anderson, that is the killer statistic for people who support Obamacare is that in 2017, the costs of these plans are going up by 22%. Bob, you talk a lot about the fact that workers haven't had a pay raise in a long time, and I agree with you. One reason is these exploding health care costs are costing employers so much money they can't afford to give workers a raise.
Well, you know, Steve, you put your finger on exactly the problem. It's not the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. It's exploding health care costs. That's the problem. That's what's going up. Regardless of whether you have Obamacare or Affordable Care Act coverage, everybody outside the Affordable Care Act is also suffering from, bigger deductibles, bigger
it was people like
premiums.
You who said that this was going to save money. You said it was going to reduce health care costs, and we're seeing these rising costs. I think that's why the American public is turned against this law.
What has happened, Steve, is that the Obamacare actually did start to slow the rise of health care costs, but the costs are still rising. And my point is that it's not Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, it's not even Medicare. The problem is you've got these huge health care mergers. Bigger and more and more economic power in hospitals and drug companies. Look at the prices of drugs. I mean, drug prices continue to rise.
Let me ask.
One of the fastest
wait, hold on, but Stephen,
one of the fastest parts of healthcare costs, and there's no attempt to actually do anything about it. And drug companies have enormous political power.
Okay, Stephen, let me ask you something Secretary Reich said early on. I mean, there are popular aspects of Obamacare, the guaranteed coverage for those with pre-existing conditions, being able to stay on your parents' insurance until you're 26. Is it possible to keep those parts of Obamacare while getting rid of the ones that people don't like the insurance mandate? Yes. Robert Reich says it's not.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, that's what Donald Trump has said. We're going to keep the coverage for people with pre-existing conditions.
But how do you do that?
Well, you basically put them in a pool, and you have public subsidies for people who have, high health care costs with pre-existing conditions. I have a niece who has epilepsy. She has high health care costs, and the public should pay for that. But you don't have to ruin, Bob, the entire health care markets. Here's what I would propose, and I think that Donald Trump is in support of this. Bob, tell me why you don't think that insurance companies, if I live in Virginia, why shouldn't I be able to buy a health care plan anywhere in the country? In other words, rather than having 2 or 3 options, I could have 100 options. More competition.
Well, I think that's I'm in favor.
Costs.
Wait a minute. I'm in favor of that, but I also want to use antitrust laws to bust up the big pharmaceutical companies, the big combinations, and also the big insurance companies. Look at the health insurance companies are merging like mad. They should not be allowed to merge. Aetna and
I think
Humana
you're onto
and all
something,
of them.
Bob. I'll agree. I think you're onto something there. I think the conglomeration of health care is a big problem. We need more competition, more choices, but we also have to go after the trial lawyers, because the medical malpractice reform would also save money for families as well. But I think we're almost there, Anderson, with a little bit of a consensus here.
Well, let's see if Senator Sanders and Senator Cruz actually get this consensus in the next hour.
We got that in 6 minutes.
But Obamacare has to go, Bob.
We'll call it Affordable Care Act. A third of Americans don't even know that Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act are the same thing.
Because it's not affordable, Bob.
All right, well, gentlemen, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much. Interesting discussion and interesting some